We're not going to work with problem 7.5 in the demonstration packet. Instead, we're going to move on to problem 7.6 in the demonstration packet. Problem 7.6 looks at correcting entries, and correcting entries are when there's an error that's been discovered and how it can be corrected in the general journal and in the ledger accounts, the general ledger accounts. Problem 7.6 reads, a $200 purchase of office supplies was incorrectly journalized and posted to the store supplies account. It says record and post the necessary correcting entry as of April 15th and use memorandum 32 as our source document. So if you notice over here, the original transaction that was made was a debit to store supplies and a credit to cash and bank. The error was the debit made to store supplies should instead have been made to office supplies. So to make the correction, we have to get the money out of store supplies and move it into office supplies. So to do that, we need to do opposite of what was originally done. So instead of debiting store supplies, we now need to credit it so that the two balances will offset and make zero. And then we will put the correct entry, which is office supplies, as the debit. So to show this in the general journal, of course on the first line, you always put the year under the date column. And then our correcting entry will look like this. So now store supplies was the original debit. To make it zero, we have to credit it in the correcting entry. And then we put the correct account as our debit. So you put the date April 15th, the debit is office supplies for $200. Store supplies is the credit for $200, and remember we indent credit. And our source document is memo 32, which is indented a little further. So now office supplies was supposed to be the original debit, and now it's corrected because it's there. Store supplies, the balance has been moved to zero because we had debited in the original transaction. So to get that $200 out of store supplies, we had to credit it. To journalize a correcting entry, that is post from the general journal to the general ledger account, we'll start with office supplies. So we go to office supplies, and the year is already given to you, and there's a balance in there. So on the next line, you're going to put the date of the correcting entry, so you're going to write 15. Then under description, you're going to write correcting entry. So that tells us if we ever had to refer back to the general ledger, we know that there was a correction made with this transaction. Then under post reference, you put G10 for general journal, page 10. Office supplies in our correcting entry in the general journal was a debit of $200, so we record $200 in the debit column. We have a debit and a debit, so we take $75 plus $200, and that gives us a new balance of $275. Then we take the account number 106 and we record that in the post reference column of the general journal. Then we need to post store supplies to the general ledger account. So we go down to store supplies. There is a balance of $300 in there. Then you'll see the original transaction, which was a debit of $200. So the original balance was $300. Then there was a debit of $200, so the new balance is $500. But we don't want that $200 in there anymore because that was an error. So on the next line, we're going to put the date, 15th, we're going to record under the description correcting entry. In post reference, we're going to put G10 for General Journal, page 10. We credited up in our correcting entry in the General Journal $200 for store supplies, so we put $200 in the credit column. So our balance was a debit of $500. We have a credit of $200, so because we have a debit and a credit, we subtract. So $500 minus $200 is $300 debit. And you will notice that we had started with a balance of $300. We had added the $200 in error to store supplies. That $200 was supposed to go to office supplies. So in the correcting entry, we now have the balance back down to $300. I think now we're ready to move on to the student packet.